Yes.
Chair, we're ready to begin.
Thank you. Good evening. This time, we'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of the City Council of Palo Alto for Tuesday, September 19th, 2023. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Burt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Lifcott-Hames.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Our first item is for members of the public to have an opportunity to speak on any item that is not on the agenda, but which is within the purview of the Finance Committee. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Chair, we have no request to speak.
Thank you. So we can move right into our first item, which is a staff recommendation that the Finance Committee recommend the City Council approve 3 different contracts related to landscape services, and I will spare reading all the details. Welcome, Darren.
Good evening.
Would you like to kick this off?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Darren Anderson with Community Services Department. My colleague Lam Do, he's Community Services Department Superintendent, is with me presenting. And we also have Parks Manager Mark Ribeiro online. Mark manages the Brightview contract, the biggest of these 3. And if there were any questions with real specifics, he could be the best go-to for the answers on that. Next slide. So the city conducted an organizational review back in 1993 and found that the city could save money if they contracted out certain services in landscape maintenance at multiple locations. And over the years, that scope and number of locations has grown steadily to the contracts you see before you today. And they include things like mowing, hedging, litter and trash removal, playground cleaning, and more recently, open space management in terms of weed management and restoration. And there are various locations ranging from parks to city facilities, medians, and open space. And within that open space category, there's 2 areas, the Foothills Nature Preserve and the Adobe Creek pedestrian bridge, which recently had some native habitat installed as part of that project. And the contract for this helps do the habitat restoration in that area. Next slide. So the purchasing department and the community services department worked together to put out a request for proposal, or RFP, seeking contractors interested in providing services for a 5-year contract. Of the 575 vendors who were notified about this opportunity, and that's an automated system within Planet Bids that shoots out those notifications, 11 viewed the RFP package and 7 attended the mandatory pre-proposal meeting, and then ultimately 4 submitted proposals. Next slide. Elon?
Yes, thank you.
You'll want to turn on your mic.
Upon staff review of the proposals, the 4 proposals that were submitted, we concluded that 3 separate contracts should be awarded. The contract for maintenance of the parks facilities, garages, medians, and substations is proposed to be awarded to Brightview Landscape Services. There was another contractor who also bid on services for this area. However, Brightview scored higher on the costs and higher rating on the experience, equipment, quality of the proposal, and other criteria. If I could also note, there was an error in the staff report where we didn't list out how we rated and scored the proposals, but it was primarily based on cost proposal, experience, equipment, and quality proposal. The Brightview contract is proposed to be for an amount of not to exceed $12,288,093 over 5 years. And then there are also 2 other contracts that are being proposed. And these contracts would cover the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, and it would also cover Foothills Nature Preserve and the Highway 101 Adobe Creek pedestrian bridge. Of 2 proposals that we received for for the water quality control plant, Kachina scored higher on that, and so we're proposing that they be awarded a contract for an amount not to exceed $516,740 over 5 years. And then for the areas of Foothills Nature Preserve and Adobe Creek Pedestrian Bridge, we only received one proposal, and that was from Grassroots Ecology. They were deemed to be a good proposal, and we are proposing a contract not to exceed $529,459 over 5 years. Next slide. In looking at the 3 contracts that are being proposed, their overall cost for over 5 years in comparison to the prior 5-year contracts, the overall cost has more than doubled for landscape maintenance and habitat restoration. The prior 5-year cost was approximately 6.5 million, and now we are looking at approximately 13.3 million for the upcoming 5-year period. There are multiple factors attributing to the higher cost, which will outline in our next slide. So the costs are increasing due to the various reasons listed here. We have additional maintenance sites. We have some that have been online, but were not included in the initial start of the 5 years of the prior contract. And then we also have further restrictions to phase out the herbicide glyphosate, which is commonly known as Roundup. We've added services on weekends at select locations. We've collectively to increase the minimum staffing level in the Brightview contract in particular. We've increased the amount of materials that are required to maintain and restore our fields, our athletic fields as well. And then material costs increase as well as labor costs increase not just since the onset of COVID, but over the 5-year span, all these costs have continually increased as well. Next slide, please. We do have some new and upcoming city projects that we were adding to this 5-year scope of services, which, as mentioned earlier, were not initially in the prior 5-year scopes of services. So we have the Sherman parking garage, which is currently in operation. And then next to the Sherman parking garage will be the public safety building, which we plan to do landscape maintenance for once the construction of the facility is completed. We also have the expansion of Bullware Park, which will significantly increase the size of the park. And then the Adobe Creek Pedestrian Bicycle Bridge was a standalone separate contract before, but now we're going to put that contract into these landscape contracts that we have as well. So next slide, please. We are phasing out the use of glyphosate. This herbicide was added to California's list of Prop 65 list of carcinogens back in 2017. Soon after that, we stopped its use in our parks and open space preserves. As we further phase out use of glyphosate, we are increasing the necessity to weed and to do weed removal by mechanical and manual means instead of a chemical means. So now we are actually going in our Brightview contract, we have not allowed them to use any glyphosate at all. So this will now transition and remove its use in road medians, roadside planting strips, and parking lots. Next slide, please. For our primary contract with Brightview, the contract now prescribes the quantities of materials such as soil, seed, and fertilizer to be used on the playing fields to upkeep and to restore them. Whereas in the prior contract, it did not stipulate or prescribe the quantity. Instead, what we were doing was we required the contractor to renovate X amount of field, X amount of acreage, and they were determined how much soil, how much amendments, how much fertilizer to use. But we switched that out, and now we are going to prescribe to them to let them know how much we want them to apply. This helps us to stipulate and speed up the renovation process. Instead of being too thin on seed or too thin on fertilizer, we're now saying this is how much you need to use for X field. So. Like this. Other costs attributing to the overall contract cost increase is we've added weekend servicing. So previously our contract for park maintenance was Monday through Friday. However, in this contract, we are proposing to add weekend service at 23 sites, which consist of 20 parks and 3 city facilities, which are Ventura Community Center, Linton Plaza, and City Hall King Plaza. The weekend service will include removal of trash, compostables, and recyclable materials, as well as litter pickup, playground servicing, and cleaning of the walkways and playground amenities as well. Next slide, please. So with all of what's been said, collectively, the addition of the maintenance sites, the phasing out of the use of glyphosate, the weekend servicing, it's resulting in a higher minimum staffing level and its associated labor costs. In particular for the Brightview contract, the minimum staffing level is now increased from 15 to 20 FTEs. As mentioned earlier, we are listing and prescribing how much materials to be used. So the Brightview contract has a requirement for them to provide engineered wood fiber for playgrounds, to ensure playground surface safety, for them to provide playground sand, for them to provide grass seed, organic fertilizer, and also baseball infield mix. So we've now required them to provide X amount, and commensurate with that, though, these costs have increased over the years. Next slide, please. So we also have a situation of labor cost increase. In the prior 5-year contract, which was issued in 2018, the labor rate ranged between $22 and $30 an hour. For this 2023 contract that we are proposing for approval, the new proposed contract rates range between $40 and $49 an hour. So that is a significant increase. And that this significantly contributes to the overall cost of the maintenance service over a 5-year span as well. Next slide, please. Okay. In regards to compensation for employees of the proposed contractors, all of their employees receive an hourly wage, which is supplemented with health benefits, paid sick leave, and a retirement program. Although prevailing wage covers the contract with Brightview and Gachina, both companies will actually be adhering to Palo Alto's minimum wage, which is higher than the prevailing wage established for a landscape maintenance laborer. With Palo Alto's minimum wage currently set at $17.25, and the prevailing wage in Santa Clara County varies between $15.50 to $15.84 for that position. For the Brightview contract in particular, their staff will receive between $18 and $34 an hour, depending on the position and the duties, a labor, a crew lead, or their project manager. For Gachina, their staff will receive between $18 and $32 an hour, also depending on the position and duties. Grassroots Ecology is a little bit different. Their staff will receive between $55 and $65 an hour, also depending on the position and duties. And then they are a nonprofit, that's an environmental nonprofit. And so they deliver their services through a volunteer model, which not be covered in amongst any salaries at all. So, okay. And that sort of concludes our presentation. We wanted to open it up for discussion as well.
Thank you. Why don't we first see if we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Chair, there's no request to speak.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues who would like to go first? Just have a question. Sure.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious on the well, we're still not going in-house on maintenance of the playing fields, right?
The maintenance of the playing fields is done in-house.
Yeah, sorry,
that's correct.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
It's still being done
We've retained
in-house. Why is that?
It's because we have a greater degree of control of the end result. And one of the challenges you get with a contractor, even a good one, and Brightview has been good, is they have a high rate of turnover. And it's not uncommon for us on a monthly basis that they have a new laborer one who's not familiar with the site, doesn't necessarily communicate with our team quite as well. So there are challenges there that we overcome. We also have staff with 25 years of expertise in caring for playing surfaces, infills, management, things like that, that I don't think these contractors have the same level of expertise or training. So between those two, the longevity, the knowledge, and the expertise, we come out, I think, ahead with a better product with the in-house team.
And do we do an analysis of what the trade-offs are on cost by maintaining that?
They did when they did this audit in 93 and then again in 2005, as I understand it.
Okay.
And that's where they sort of drew the line. We'll leave this as an in-house and the others we will contract out. That was the recommendation, and it's steadfast in that same breakdown.
Okay, I think in the future, given approaching 20 years then since we've last done that analysis, I think that would be helpful. I'm curious, do we know, I mean, the community survey asked residents about their view of just parks, and they're good or excellent, which is great. That doesn't break that down further into kind of understanding various elements of the parks, right? So we don't know how.
No.
Okay. Do we know anecdotally how residents are feeling about playing fields? I mean, is it something that the residents value so much that our playing fields are in such great condition that it's not worth looking into?
No, I think it's fair to say that they care very, very much about the conditions of those fields, and they're in communication with us constantly about ideas and proposals for improving them. I wouldn't say that they think we have the greatest fields ever. In fact, quite often we'll hear, you should do it like such and such agency. And we reach out to them and we do almost identical level of servicing, same products that we use. Oftentimes that's the thing, like, well, maybe it's the seed type that they use. It's not the issue. It's typically the amount of use that those fields receive. It exhausts the capability of the grass to stand up, and it wears out. And it's very frustrating to them. Part of the thing we've built into this contract is these extra servicings that we added in the last one too, and it helped tremendously improve the quality. So the succinct answer is they're not entirely satisfied with our play fields. They care a lot, and they want us to take the best care that we can. And I think this contract helps us get there, in addition to having the in-house staff expertise.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious kind of exploring that a little more in the future. I mean, it's been several years since I've been on the playing fields, but I remember never being impressed by the conditions. And I remember even playing on a softball league at Greer Park, and the team decided to switch to Menlo Park because the conditions were, just kind of, the team generally felt they were relatively dangerous. And so I'd be interested in kind of exploring that a little more. And then one thing I'm hopeful for, we're expanding these services for weekends now. I recall in the past when residents would rent out like picnic areas, the trash cans would be covered and they weren't able to use it. I assume that's because we didn't have the pickup service on the weekends. With this now, our residents who are renting out those picnic areas going to be able to use those trash cans? Is that piece going to be removed?
That's correct.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm frustrated to see the increase in the contract costs, but unfortunately, it's not surprising given what we've seen everywhere else in costs. But would be interested in the future seeing how we can maybe mitigate those more, or again looking at going, or at least seeing the analysis of in-house first.
Yeah,
those are my questions for now.
Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Doe, for your presentation. I appreciate it. Just picking up on where the Vice Mayor left off on the cost increases for the Brightview. So first of all, am I clear that Brightview is a renewal that we have been, okay,
yes,
great.
it's an incumbent.
It looks like it's slightly more than 100% increase. And I think my question is, so you've anticipated much of the increase in the FY24 budget. Much of this appears to have been predicted, and yet we are dipping into the BSR to the tune of $400,000. So I'm curious about the forecasting process. When you know this lengthy contract of 5 years is coming up for renewal, there are these 7 factors that have contributed to this massive increase. Can you just talk with me a little bit about how you go about forecasting what this is going to be so it hits the budget correctly, and what didn't happen such that we were kind of caught off guard by this
Yeah,
increase.
my colleague Lom Do can speak to this better than me.
Our department and also with the Office of Management and Budget work together to hedge, which is what I think that you're referring to in the budget. So we did go with almost an anticipation of a 40% cost increase. We didn't think that it would go this high towards a little bit over 100% cost increase. So our hedge was, you're absolutely right, was not close to what we would like to have been, and that's why we're asking for the a recommendation for a request from the budget stabilization reserve. We unfortunately have not had done as well as we'd like in projecting these cost increase over time. We work with our contractors and we ask them for one-off tasks that we ask as additional services. They do give us an hourly rate, and so we sort of use that as sort of a gauge of where we can and where we think the cost will come in higher at. However, we're also up against material costs that we just constantly, it's not just these contracts, but even in our operating budget for where we made our own planting materials has, in essence, we've seen doubling of our own planting material costs. So unfortunately, we just haven't had a good grasp of it.
Thank you. Turning to the concept of pesticide-free sites, I was kind of intrigued by that in the contract with Bright View. On page 37, 38, actually page 38, we see that certain parks are listed as pesticide-free and certain city facilities are. And I'm relatively new to this process, so I wasn't aware that we had some parks that were pesticide free and not others. My own home park, if you will, one of Briones, is not on the list. So it just made me curious as to how this particular designation came about, and are we moving toward all of our parks being pesticide free? And if not, what's the rationale for that?
Yeah, great question. It's slightly complex, but the simple explanation is we started small as we transitioned away from herbicides and wanted to choose sites that we had a good chance of success, that we weren't likely to have a big infestation of something that we didn't really have a mechanism or a chance to control if it got out of hand with manual techniques. So we strategically selected these beginning ones to get a couple of victories under our belt. But at the same time, our IPM program in the city had been taking off, and we wanted to support that and we wanted to move forward. And so we have been progressively reducing herbicides such that we haven't used an herbicide in our urban parks, any herbicide in 5 years at any park. So in actual fact, Briones has been herbicide free for 5 years. We didn't designate it one because it's got the potential to have an infestation where we might need one herbicide to address a problem.
Thank you. And my final question is regarding a reference to the homeless encampments on packet page 47. I just it's rare paging through a contract that you see a reference to the fact that we do have a population of unhoused people in the city. And of course, it makes sense that in a contract for landscaping and park and facilities maintenance that would need to be addressed. It makes me curious as to whether Ms. McDonough in the CMO office, who I know has responsibility for housing and unhoused residents, whether she is aware of this particular provision that really contemplates what happens to the belongings of unhoused people. I know sometimes on the council we receive complaints of concern about how somebody's belongings were handled ultimately by law enforcement. And this provision of the contract contemplates that, yes, belongings may be noticed and then removed. And it's a question, or maybe it's just a thought I'd like to offer, which is I hope that Ms. McDonough is, she's in a relatively new role, and it would be great to know that as she aims to look across the organization of the city at the various ways in which we work with or try to support and also handle issues relating to unhoused people, that she would be made aware of this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not positive she was made aware of this particular one in this contract. However, staff from the parks team, myself included, have worked with her very recently and are currently on a few similar situations with unhoused in the park and how to manage that where everyone comes out in a healthy, good position.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thanks. So I have a few questions, although my first one maybe was answered by the slides. On the top of packet page 10, which is the labor cost increase, it gives these ranges, but it then in the slide, it looked like the slide was referring to the employee compensation, whereas is this referring to the billing rate from the contractor?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's a
Good.
correct distinguishment.
All right, thanks. And then on the various 7 different contributing factors to the cost increases, can you give us any sense on the proportionality of which of these things are kind of driving about what % of the increase, or what's the biggest driver and second biggest?
Yes, the large one is the collective need for a higher FTE. And with the higher FTE is the labor rate associated with that. That's also compounded by the difference in the prior labor rate versus the new labor rate. So two compounding factors associated with labor. And then after that, there is the material costs, which would be another large factor contributing to the cost increase. Those are the 2 largest ones.
Okay. And then, so on the material costs, was it staff's sense that the contractor, because they were paying for materials, was cutting as thin as they could? Yeah. And we want better quality. So Greer's feel would be better or whatever. Yeah, got it. Okay. And then on the performance monitoring, how does that occur? Because I'll just say anecdotally, I see different places in the city where medians may not have or may be weed infested at different places, and they may not be the most immediately obvious ones, but how do we monitor that? And I want to share a thought after hearing that.
Sure, I can help with that one, Lon. We have 2 park inspectors that their full-time job is either inspecting playgrounds or monitoring these contractors, ensuring they're taking care of the different sites appropriately. And there's a tremendous amount of redirecting as they focus perhaps on the wrong thing, or something new emerges where we say this needs your attention. They spend a significant amount of time on that. We also have the gentleman on the phone with us, Mark Ribeiro, the park supervisor. He does the same. He manages the contract. He meets with this is the Brightview contract I'm referencing, meets with them on a regular basis, I think every couple weeks, goes out with their manager, spot inspects places, talks about problems. One of the things they have to argue over is, like, it looks like you're thin on staff. We're monitoring how many people you out here. You're required to have 15 FTE. We're seeing only 12. And so that begins this debate and push from us to say, we want you to live up to the contract expectations, what we're paying you for. That in short is how we end up overseeing it.
Well, that sounds like that on the parks, we've kind of got a good system, but they've then Brightview's responsibilities extends beyond the parks. And as I think about it, the areas that I've kind of noticed are outside of parks. And, if I'll just kind of, I don't always do this, but kind of referring to my experience in manufacturing sector. And as we evolve through different understandings of really quality systems and how to overcome a whole bunch of quality barriers. One, we moved away from thinking that we could solve quality problems with more inspectors. Mm-hmm. And we ended up just moving into a whole educational system for the whole company, top to bottom, where we took the entire company from director of engineering to entry level personnel into the same quality training program. This was through one of our community colleges in this case. And basically, it created a culture where quality was everybody's responsibility. And one way that I've long thought on various reporting, we just, people say, well, we need more code enforcement officers, or in this case, more people oversight, hired specifically for this kind of thing. And I think that we may have an opportunity to have develop a policy and a culture where kind of all the city staff are out in the field are quality inspectors.
Yeah.
And they just report, but it has to be through kind of a broader training program. We can't just say report it. But we have public works people out there all the time. We have utilities people all the time. And my perception is that they're focused on their job, and there might be something staring them in the face that I ride by and I go, geez, look at that. And that's not their job. So it's a question of whether we might be able to move into a direction of kind of redefining responsibilities. And it goes beyond this particular kind of contract monitoring to other aspects. So I'll just put that out there for consideration. And then I did have a specific question on the budget increase. I guess it's middle of packet page 10, second paragraph in the budget. It says that the FY24 budget included funding in the amount of 1.8 million above prior levels. But then that's we need an additional 458,000 beyond the 1.8 for this FY24 budget, correct? Am I getting that right?
Yes, you are. One is the contract increase and one is the delta to what was included in the 24 adopted budget
The contract increase
from the prior contract terms.
So if we have about 6 million increased for, let's see, I'm trying to remember where that was covering the 3 contracts at those numbers?
Yes, over the
Okay.
life of the contract.
Okay.
So I think 5 years.
But 5 years. So if you divide 5 years by a little over 6 million, you wouldn't get 2.3 million per year. Am I misunderstanding something? Why does it appear that we added 1.8 million and we got another almost 500,000 beyond that in FY24, but the increase over 5 years is 6 point something million? Or about 1.3 million per year.
So I think the sentence I think we might be mixing apples and oranges, but Lam,
Okay.
I'll let you correct me if I'm wrong. The 1.8 million is what was included in the adopted budget. And in order to reach the annual cost, we need to increase the budget by about 460,000, some in the general fund, the majority in the general fund, some in other funds. And then the combination of those two actions is what makes us be able to fully fund a 12-month cost, essentially, of these contracts, which would be about 2.3 million. Does that make sense?
All right. Is this, we put in, it says we put 1.8 million above prior levels. Not that we had a total 1.8 million.
Chair, thank you for pointing that out. It should be reading that we put in 1.8 million for the overall budget, not an increase.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that
Thank
above
you.
prior levels.
Yeah, I think the
we should
clauses,
delete that. Got it. Okay.
clauses are
That now
erroneous
makes
there.
sense to me.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, let me see if I had anything else. No, that covers my questions. So, anything else, colleagues? All right, then we need a motion that we to recommend the finance committee make the recommendations for the staff proposed contracts and cost increases, including do we need to reference the BSR or where the funds?
I think if the committee chose to support staff's recommendation in the staff report, to be forwarded to the council, that should be sufficient.
I move to support the staff recommendation on item 1.
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Chair Burt,
Yes,
Councilmember Lifcott Hames,
Yes.
the motion carries.
thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members
Oh,
of the
and
committee.
I'm sorry, before we just leave, I wanted to just raise a question. I neglected to do so. It's not, doesn't need to be included in the motion. It's just related to the issues. As we look at our costs of the maintenance, on Foothills Park, we have a massive amount of turf. And a portion of that is used for recreation and needs to stay turf long-term. We have a new state law that is on the horizon looking at commercial applications that only ornamental turf is not allowed. A bunch of that turf is, I don't know if we call it ornamental or not. It's used by geese and others. It actually is some of the locations even along Buckeye Creek are inconsistent with the setbacks of non-native vegetation within the distance of the, I don't know if it's the 50 or 100 feet of the natural stream bed there. And it really would be an opportunity for habitat restoration, and we irrigate that and fill Baronda Lake with very expensive Hetch water, which we'll be getting to in the next item. And so has staff looked at whether we should begin to evaluate two options. One, where we should and shouldn't have turf in Foothills Park, and what water source we might use as an alternative to the Hetch water, meaning is there a sustainable water supply in that area? We basically fill Baronda Lake with Hetch water. It leaks, it either evaporates or leaks down the dam. It's an incredibly expensive way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating, especially when it's leaking out the bottom, although we do plumb it back up, but still we capture and put it back, but we still lose a lot in the process. We in that contract with Grassroots Ecology, we have something called the lawn conversion, something they started many years ago, but it hasn't really moved beyond their initial, I don't think I can put an acreage to it. It's so small. And so far they've just been sustaining it, making sure the natives in that area are doing well and the weeds are out. And we've talked about them expanding that. The vision right now is to continue a linear line from the creek. You know, that portion of turf closest to the creek is not used as much. And we were going to essentially pull it back from there closer to the road and gradually convert that to natives. And I think we've been waiting long enough to see if this is successful. It is, it works. We have natives going there. So now this next step, hopefully within this contract, it's not going to fully fund doing the entire length. We may have to do a separate CIP for that, but I think we can expand it within the confines of this contract.
That's great. Very glad to hear that. Okay, thank you. All right, so our next item is a recommendation by staff of council approval for a financing plan for a local salt removal facility at the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, and to direct staff to secure funding and solicit bids for a construction contract and construction management services contract. And Mr. Eggleston, you
I will
Kick it off.
kick us off.
thank you.
So good evening, Chair Burt and Finance Committee, Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. The local salt removal facility at the Regional Water Quality Control Plant is a project that's intended to improve the quality of recycled water. It's been in the works since 2017 and actually earlier if you kind of count some of our earlier efforts. Just almost exactly a year ago at a council study session, there was a discussion and concern at the time about the fact that our cost estimate for the project had increased from what was a feasibility level estimate from some years back of 20 million up to $56 million as the design work on the project had progressed. And at that study session, staff committed to preparing a preliminary financial plan and returning to council for kind of a step to authorize proceeding into the construction phase before taking that step. So we're here to review that plan that we committed to with Finance Committee tonight. Also kind of excited to share the good news that capital funding gap of about $40 million that we were describing last year has been closed through a federal grant that we received and also through the city of Mountain View's willingness to pay the full remainder of the capital cost that still remained. So with me here at the table are Karin North, Assistant Director for Environmental Services Division, and Diego Martinez Garcia, who's the engineer at the treatment plant working on the project. And then I'd also like to acknowledge Mountain View Vice Mayor Pat Showalter in the audience here with us. And with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Karin and Diego to walk through the presentation.
Thanks. All right, so Brad already introduced myself, but Karin North, Assistant Director of Public Works. This is our staff recommendation for the Finance Committee to approve the financing plan for the local salt removal facility. Authorize staff to amend the recycled water agreement between City of Palo Alto and Mountain View, and then direct staff for an invitation for bids for construction and secure the financing for the project through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which we often call SRF. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit of history of recycled water and to remind staff, council that we are a regional water quality control plant. We have multiple partner agencies. Our recycled water program started back in the early 1980s, actually from Valley Water, doing deep well injections to try and reduce salt intrusion barrier. And then they gave us the filters, the recycled water filters. And so we actually started to reduce pollutant loading into the bay and to reduce our effluent discharge, started utilizing recycled water at our golf course and Greer Park. Those kind of phase one of our 1992 recycled water master plan, which I was very excited that we finally updated the 1992 plan to the 2019 Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan. But in the meantime, we did pass a recycled water ordinance. We have a pipeline, which is our phase two of the 1992 recycled water master plan to Mountain View. And there's a stub out for Palo Alto for phase three. We also, all of our cities, Mountain View, Los Altos, and Palo Alto, have a recycled water salinity reduction policy to back in 2010 to get the salinity down to 600 TDS at that point in time, total dissolved solids. And then a lot of our partners did a lot of infiltration work to reduce infiltration from salty groundwater coming into the sewers. So many of our partners put a lot of infrastructure, especially Mountain View did, along the baylands. And then we did a salt removal facility study with 80% funded by Valley Water, and then 10% from Mountain View and 10% from Palo Alto. The preliminary design as well. And then the Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan, which is 90% funded by Valley Water and 10% funded by the plant And so that we updated in 2019. In that meantime, we also did in 2015 an environmental impact report of phase 3 expansion. And then we also did an addendum to that environmental impact report for the salt removal facility that council accepted in 2020. And since then, we've been doing the design and then funding analysis for the small salt removal facility. Next slide. It's a very high level of what's been going on for quite a few years. Did you want to add something? Go ahead.
Well, just I think that it's a little bit confusing here, and it comes in on this slide that Karin's about to talk about phase 1 and 2 of this local salt removal facility at the treatment plant. So, but just to be clear, when she was referencing phase 3, that's the project we've talked about over a lot of years of potentially expanding the system and building a pipeline to Stanford Research Park primarily. So this phase 1 and 2, as we talk about them here, is really this small facility. If you hear phase 3, that's this potential future larger project.
Thanks. Thank you for clarifying. So this is the location for the local salt removal facility. When we did the feasibility, this is the only spot we could really find to put it in our facility. But we're basically just trying to produce a higher quality recycled water and then decrease the demand on potable for irrigation use. And so we do have we call it a phase 1, phase 2, but it's really for sizing. The construction would be to build a phase 1, but that could be sized up quickly to a phase 2. So all of the larger tanks are sized for phase 2, but the reverse osmosis membranes would be sized for phase 1. Next slide. So this is just to give some history on the project overview, kind of what it will look like on that little corner. Have 100% design right now. And so we're going to replace the existing soil filter that's on that piece of parcel right now, a new permeate storage tank, microfiltration reverse osmosis process, which is the under our canopy, a blending station. So that produces the lower quality, basically takes our current recycled water and blends it with this pure water to get a low total dissolved solids. So we're looking at around 450 total dissolved solids. So remember, our original goal was 600, but we realized with Hetch Hetchy being such a good quality of water that we really wanted to continue to get the salts down lower for our salt sensitive species. And then we're going to do landscaping, paving, and site work around the perimeter. Next slide. So this is some of the different agency roles. So Valley Water is obviously very supportive of the project. They're really trying to push a use of recycled water within our county. And so that's part of their recycle. They have a full strategic plan looking at improving the reuse from all the sewage treatment plants within the county. So for us, we're going to provide a little bit of funding. This is a little bit older. Now we're not putting as much towards construction, but it'll be for the ongoing O&M of the salt removal facility and the sewage treatment plant staff that are funded by the partner agencies are managing the design, construction, operation, maintenance. And then currently the distribution of the enhanced recycled water within Palo Alto is managed by Public Works wastewater treatment plant staff. And then Mountain View is funding the rest of the capital, and then the ongoing O&M, and then distributing their own enhanced recycled water. Next slide. So some of the benefits to Palo Alto is that we get a higher quality water used at golf course and Greer Park. It supports our salinity reduction goals. It reduces the conversion of the marsh, the salt marsh near our outfall. We've been monitoring the outfall since the creek got moved. Back San Francisco Creek got moved and the outfall was installed, and we've been monitoring that probably every 5 years. We were going to increase our recycled water to reduce our discharge to the bay. So as we increase our recycled water use in Mountain View and others, we'll reduce what we're discharging out into the bay, which is a benefit. And then could potentially be one of the future steps for direct potable reuse in the future. And then we obviously continues our collaborative relationship with our treatment plant partners. We're very happy that we have a great relationship with our partners. And then it sets us up for potential future recycled water customers within Palo Alto. So originally the 1992 master plan had potential pipelines in Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan looked at the phase 3 going to Stanford Research Park, but there might be some other future options in that we haven't done analysis on at this point in time. Then we're going to turn over to Diego to do the rest of the slides.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everyone. Diego Martinez Garcia, Associate Engineer for Environmental Services Division. So I'm going to walk you through kind of the numbers of this preliminary finance plan. This first slide shows the cost estimates at 90% design from October 2022 for the capital portion of the project. So we have construction of the main AWPS structure, which, like Brad said, it's called phase 1, where in reality covers spacing for accommodating phase 2 of this local salt removal facility at $43 million. This estimate includes the design of the project, order contingency for construction, program management, which is part of all CIP projects at the wastewater treatment plant, construction management, which is about 10% of the total construction cost, and odor control construction project, which is a replacement project that we have to remove an oil soil bed filter on site to replace it with and put it in somewhere else so we can build this project. Next slide, please. From the total $56 million capital cost, we have two external funding sources outside Mountain View and Palo Alto, which is the Valley Water contribution from the Tourney 2019 partnership agreement, which contributes $16 million. We have a USBR grant for about $13 million, giving a total of almost $29 million or 51% that it's already covered. The remaining cost allocation is going to be split between Palo Alto and Mountain View, but while we were preparing this finance plan, Mountain View stepped up and decided to fund the full remaining portion of capital project, estimated at $27 million. So that will cover the $56.3 million. From the Mountain View allocation, that would be covered by a SRF, State Revolving Fund loan. So the estimated debt service annually will be about $1.4 million, which is on the lower portion of the table. Thank you. The other component of the project cost are O&M cost, and this will depend on how much recycled water is used by both agencies. So for the first operating year that we estimated, fiscal year 2026, O&M cost will be around $600,000 to produce 1.125 million gallons per day of permeate or pure water. These O&M costs include maintenance and repairs of the membranes and all equipment in the facility, energy cost, mainly due to pumping, chemical use for the process, and membrane consumables. This cost includes an escalation of 4% per year. The next one, please. As mentioned, the O&M cost allocation would be based on the recycled water demand. Currently, based on discussions with Palo Alto staff while we were preparing this plan, the city doesn't have plans to expand recycled water use, and the city is planning to keep existing recycled water systems, which is phase 1 and phase 2 of the recycled water system that we currently have. Whereas Mountain View has a larger customer base than us, and they are demanding pretty much higher water quality and higher demand than us. So for the first operational year, fiscal year 2026, we estimated Palo Alto demand will be 31% versus Mountain View, which will be 68%. As years move forward, Mountain View percent will keep increasing, and Palo Alto will keep decreasing in the same rate. So from the $600,000 that we estimated for fiscal year 2026 for O&M, Palo Alto would be contributing almost $200,000 and Mountain View $400,000. The next slide, please. So this table, it's just an extract from the plan and shows the first 10 years of operation for the facility, combining capital cost and O&M cost for both agencies. So for Palo Alto, which is the first row, we included only O&M cost, as I mentioned. And you can see they remain pretty stable because we assume the demand will remain stable throughout the time, only accounting for inflation, for increase in O&M cost. Mountain View's contribution will be much higher, including the $1.4 million from the SRF loan, plus their portion of the O&M cost that increase every year. The full table is located in the attachment A. And then we wanted to close with a current schedule of the project. This portion and plan went to City of Mountain View Council in June 2023. We're today here at the Finance Committee, and we're expecting to go to Palo Alto City Council next month. And then if the project moves forward, we'll have to work and continue and close the SRF loan agreement for the $27 million that Mountain View will pay. We have to close and sign the grant with the Bureau of Reclamation for $13 million. And we also need to amend the recycled water agreement with Mountain View so we can bill them their portion of the capital cost. If we move forward, we would estimate construction in mid-2024 and construction complete by the end of 2026. And I think going back to their recommendation, we recommend that the committee approve the financing plan for this project to be constructed and also authorize us to amend the recycled water agreement with City of Palo Alto. And then issue invitations for bids for a construction of this project and secure financing through SRF of the remaining $27 million. Thank you.
Thank you. So why don't we hear from members of the public first and then go into our questions and discussion. And I know that Vice Mayor Showalter would like to speak. And so please join us at the table. And do we have any other speakers?
Just one speaker.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. My name is Pat Showalter, and I serve this year as the Vice Mayor of the City of Mountain View. And I'm here on behalf of the City Council because, as was just explained, last June, we did take a vote on this, on going forward with this offer. So we've heard about it. We think it's a great idea, and we hope, I'm here to tell you that I sincerely hope that you will also think it's a great idea and move forward with it. But before I go any further, I want to make sure to thank you and your staff for being wonderful partners, really for decades, in this shared wastewater treatment plant. I mean, Palo Alto has always supplied the staff, and it's always been, top-notch, high quality, good to work with. I mean, just all the superlatives that you would want a relationship to be. And we all know that that's not always the case with our interagency relations. So I want to mention that because it's a big deal to us, and we really appreciate it, and we want you to know that we do. The other thing I wanted to explain to you is, why do we want to spend all this money? I mean, you must wonder. It's $27 million, although it's the debt service is less, is quite a bit of money. And there's quite a number of reasons. Some of the ones were mentioned. Of course, it would be great to reduce the fresh water input into the bay. That's something the Regional Water Quality Control Board has been asking Palo Alto or us jointly to do for decades, and we have done that somewhat. Another reason is because we share your sustainability goals and your feeling that climate change is real, and we need to be responsible partners to do our part in our little part of the world to take care of it. And recycled water is a drought-proof supply. So as the fluctuation in snowpack goes forward, this will provide us with a cushion of really good water supply that we will have for many years, and that's very valuable to our residents and to the economies of our community. The other thing is, there's always the idea of using sort of getting the fit right. And this is a time when we want to use the right quality for the right use. And we don't really think that the idea of importing water from a national park to for all of our uses that quality water isn't needed for everything. Recycled water has many, many uses that are really good. And then another reason that we want to do this so badly is because we are expecting a great deal of development in the North Bay Shore. I'm sure that you've heard of our North Bay Shore master plan. And part of that is to require dual plumbing in all of those new buildings. And so we feel like we've made this requirement for dual plumbing. And that kind of gives us an obligation to supply people with a good quality of water. And so that's what this does. This provides a much better quality of water for irrigation and for multiple trips through cooling towers and for use in just indoor plumbing. It's just a much better quality of water. So I just wanted to share that with you so you understand there's really, a very compelling reason why we want to do this. And the other thing I would like to say is right now, we're using most of the recycled water, but we hope that over time you will also increase your use of the recycled water. And as that happens, if we need to move into phase 2, we'll be happy to do that because again, we'll all be supporting using kind of the right quality for the right use. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I just want to say thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And Pat, I did have a couple of questions. Just so everybody understands, the dual plumbing means that you have plumbing within buildings for non-potable use like this, or you're treating this as non-potable use, as well as potable, not just the irrigation versus non-irrigation, but toilets use this water.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
the reason we want to do that, Councilmember Burt, is because it's not cost prohibitive to do dual plumbing when you're actually building things from scratch. But if you want to retrofit things, it's very, very expensive. So that's why we're building this in from the beginning on these new buildings. Right.
And we appreciate too that massive development in that area is what enabled you to incorporate dual plumbing because you were doing it on new construction versus retrofit. And the expanded amount of recycled water that will go from the what is the current high TDS recycled water, which works for designated landscaping vegetation types that can tolerate that, and the dual plumbing. Is your expanded need, is that just new development in that area? Is that what would consume the additional recycled water?
At the moment, that's what it would be, but we do have a plan to extend our recycled water system on this side of 101 into the East Wissman area. So I'm not sure exactly of the timeline for that, but I know that it's something that we are working on, environmental compliant, environmental documents and estimates and that sort of thing.
And with the lower total dissolved solids, you won't need to restrict the types of landscaping that can be used there.
That's right.
Right. Okay. And how do you price, if I might ask, how do you price the cost of that water to your customers versus your primarily Hetch Hetchy water that you provide for potable uses?
I knew I should have done more homework. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So their recycled water is around 65% of their potable water. So
the pricing is about 65% of the pricing of potable.
Correct.
Okay. And Do you know if that pricing is cost-based or is it market value-based?
So they did a cost of service analysis in 2013, and they're currently updating their cost of service analysis. So I'm assuming their price may change, also dependent on the quality of the water. So their price may go up.
And they've got both their share of O&M, and then they have the debt service that they would have for this, whereas right now they don't have a debt service on that, other than maybe piping.
They have a
debt
pipeline debt service right
pipeline.
now.
Okay. I'm curious because it's been one of the things that as we look forward is on how we would use our blended water and we had wanted to put a purple pipe into Stanford Research Park, and they wouldn't allow us to do that because of the vegetation that they have today. And that's what stalled that expansion. But with the low TDS, it opens up that possibility going forward. And lastly, we have our water utility and we have our wastewater treatment plant. Do we know in Mountain View's case, who charges for that water? Is it the Public Works Department or the water?
No, we work directly with their water utility, and they put their recycled water and water utility under the same umbrella.
Okay. So that's the interesting thing. And just at a high level, as we started, looking at expanded uses of recycled water back 7-8 years ago with our partner agencies, we start getting into a question on kind of the business models, because we go from water as a waste that if you'll see on, what was it, slide, I guess it's slide 7, where we see some of the benefits, and basically, to surprise of many, that discharging water that isn't saline, even though it's for us too high a dissolved solids for irrigation, discharging that into the bay in periods when, and particularly when periods when it's not naturally flowing into the bay, is environmentally detrimental to discharge essentially fresh water in the bay. So that's when we, as Karin had pointed out, that's when we really started moving toward trying to reduce that discharge. And that's thinking of our wastewater as a waste and an environmentally detrimental waste. And now we move into a period where what we were calling our recycled water, not our low salt water, nor our advanced water, which is essentially potable, what's going to be built down at the former Los Altos wastewater treatment site. We started having our waste become a commodity that could be upvalued after different treatments. But it actually has an input commodity value that we haven't tried to figure out. Okay, if I was going to go into the business of recycling water, where do I get the water that I'm going to recycle, and what's that worth? Well, we can't quite figure that out, but somewhere in there, that water now has a value even before it's treated, and then it has a much higher value after it's treated, somewhere close to the value of Hetch Hetchy water, but presumably discounted from it, like Mountain View is doing. So that's kind of at the high level. It's an interesting scenario for us, having our water utility and our regional water quality control plant. The water control plant is a partnership under the auspices of our Public Works Department, but for 5 other entities. So that just so everybody knows, that's Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, Stanford, and East Palo Alto. Pardon me?
Sanitary district, not all of East Palo.
Portion of East Palo Alto, sorry. So we have this other interesting, so that becomes a partnership that we're producing this, now a commodity. And then we have our water utility. So how do all the value transfers go on? And this is kind of a new thing that we've been struggling with for some time, and I don't know that we have all the answers, but I just kind of wanted to frame it to make sure we're all going, wow, this is an interesting change in business relationships between partner agencies, between our public works department and our utilities, and how to figure out how to kind of sort that out for the future is something we're still grappling with. Okay, so I got a lot of help there on understanding what Mountain View is doing, and thank you, Vice Mayor, for coming today. We really appreciate Mountain View's partnering and commitment to our shared environmental values. Okay, now turning back to my colleagues.
We have one more public comment.
Oh, we do.
Did we?
No.
Oh, no, sorry, my bad. I thought Ben said there was.
Who would, anybody have any questions or comments? Julie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Mayor. It's wonderful to hear from you and wonderful to hear how positively Mountain View views its partnership with Palo Alto. We appreciate it. I want to thank the staff for the presentation. Boy, have I learned a lot. And actually, Chair, thank you for giving that high-level view of the complex future we will arrive at as we create our own commodity out of waste. Pretty cool. Let's see. My first question is, I'm curious as to why to date our city has made such limited use of recycled water. I understand that we are using it in Greer Park. It makes me wonder why Greer Park. What was it about Greer Park that made it a suitable location for recycled water? The golf course, in contrast, Mountain View seems to be making much more use than we do. And I understand there's new development going in North Bayshore, but it sounds like already Mountain View is making more use of recycled water. So help me understand how that decision was made.
Sure. So back in the 80s, when we were told that we needed to reduce effluent going out into the bay and reduce pollutant loadings going into the bay, because there are some contaminants in water, we looked at the golf course and Greer Park because they were the two closest, largest areas that we could utilize as much water as possible. And also at that point in time, we had a pipeline going down to the golf course down in Mountain View. So those are the closest ones where we could get as much water as we could utilize on turf and reduce what's going on at the bay. And then in regards to expansion of pipelines, we did a lot of analysis in the Northwest County Recycle Water Strategic Plan. And we also did a financial plan of the early, we call it phase 3, because it was the 1992 Recycle Water Master Plan. That was the third phase of the expansion. And right now it looked like it was $40 million to get a pipeline for 900 acre feet of water. So at that point in time, council decided to take a hold and continue to do more analysis. And in parallel, we were also told we needed to reduce salinity to get there. So we needed to build a salt removal facility before we could expand pipelines within Palo Alto.
Thank you. Council last evening, I think it was, began talking about the San Antonio Coordinated Area, or the BASA area as it's now being called, the Bayshore Alma San Antonio, and whether we should designate it as a priority site so we might be eligible for future funding and really start to draw a nice line around this new area where we may ultimately have a lot of new housing units. So given this conversation, it makes me wonder whether we will be thinking about doing this dual plumbing thing there. And I'm getting a nod of yes from the chair. Okay, cool. Another question is, how far out is direct potable reuse for us in Palo Alto?
So when we started working on the feasibility study, the reverse osmosis or salt removal facility, at that point in time, the regulations hadn't been complete for direct potable reuse in the future. The draft regulations are currently out, and now it looks like we need to put a pre-treatment our salt removal facility and then a post-treatment for direct potable. So at some point in time, we're setting the stage. So if it's something we want to do in the future, we can. It will be not a ton of water since the site it's not a huge production of water, but it gives us that opportunity in the future.
Can I wade in on that? Because so what the regulations Karen was talking about is at the state level, up until now, it has not been legal to have direct potable reuse, although indirect potable has been going on in some Southern California areas where basically water that doesn't have this final step that Karen was talking about, which is basically it is a step to break down the synthetic organic materials. We misuse the term organic somewhat, but these are carbon-based materials that are, think of them as pharmaceuticals that are in our water and just everything that pops up there. And that's kind of the final part that is needed for us to be able to safely consume that. Although in Southern California, what they've been doing is putting it into their groundwater. It mixes with their natural groundwater, and then they pump it back out, and somehow that's okay. And that's been going on for a couple decades. So that's where we stand on a change in that way. But aside from this site, we had a big discussion on the advanced water recycling facility down at San Antonio that Valley Water's putting in. And one of the concerns I had was that, and I think others on the council expressed similarly, is that we weren't going to get any of that essentially potable water that is going to be produced there. They plan on piping it to other needs that they have in the county. I think initially for indirect potable use, right? They're going to use it for percolating. And it was stated to us that that location, if I recall correctly, we think may have additional capacity beyond what has gone to them. And we may be able to tap into some of that water going forward. Is that correct? Am I remembering this right?
You want me to take it?
Go ahead.
So that was our staff and utilities combined have been working with Valley Water. As Valley Water does more analysis on our effluent availability, they may not size the facility to take more of our water. So it's still up to discussion, partly because, as you are well aware, our flows have been declining. And Valley Water realized that they want to make sure they're not oversizing. So, you know, in the summer months when they probably need the water the most for indirect potable reuse to recharge the aquifer down in South County, the Rinconada ponds, is when we're also our demand for recycled water is the highest and our flow is the lowest. And so when they've done more analysis on our flow availability, I don't think they're going to upsize it unless we get requested to do that.
Interesting. Well, it's outside the discussion this meeting, but it is part of kind of this master set of big moving pieces going on. I have heartburn over us providing the input water commodity of the wastewater, and we call recycled water at that what we put in there. No, it's not at that level. All right, the wastewater and the very valuable limited publicly owned land that we have for a purpose like this, and not being able to get that water. But I don't know if there's any way to redo that agreement. But it does go into that there are kind of four big parts to this. We've got the rebuild of our regional water quality control plant, massive project that all we and our partner agencies are all doing and funding. That's necessary. That's part of what feeds into this. We have the advanced water recycling facility, and then we have phase 1 and phase 2 of our own, we now call it salt removal facility. And all those kind of have interrelationships with each other. And that's the other part, aside from the business side, is how do each of these projects relate to each other, and what benefits do we derive as a city going forward? And I'm still struggling with some of those things.
Thank you for all of that. It's such a gift to have you here with this historical information and also to see you nerd out on issues that you really love, like water. I think this question might be for Mr. Martinez Garcia. It's really related to the finances. I was intrigued that when the project came back around, I mean, this has been in the making for so long. I could feel the anticipation and the delight as I was reading the staff report. Finally came back to council last September and October, the notion of 90% of the costs were in, 90% of the design costs. And I'm curious as to just how that works. I saw the chart that said, you know, on a certain date, 30% of the design costs were in, then 60, then 90. Tell me what that means. They're not able to predict 100% until we get far enough along.
Yeah, so those percents relates to like the level of detail of the design. So the original cost that we got on the feasibility study, it's called 10%, which is just planning. So it's just like basically saying this is the facility, the components, but in a very, very high level with no more like details on materials, prices, quantities, very, very limited. And then 30, 60, 90% are like the definitions of the design where the consultant goes and starts like really calculating like by the linear foot of pipe, for example, all the equipment. And then as unfortunately, the design was on parallel with during the pandemic. So we were struggling with the inflation that was like, you know, changing everything, the supply chain issues and a lot of things that were just increasing the cost at every phase of the design.
Okay. So if I'm correct, 90% of the design takes us to this 56 million.
Correct.
Of which Mountain View has decided to step up and pay half.
Correct.
So the remaining 10%, where's that?
So the definition of 10% was completed between October 2022 and June 2023, but we didn't get an updated cost estimate for the 100% until we finalize this plan and get your input on it.
Can I add a little nuance there? So Diego's correct. We go through in engineering and construction projects this sequence of design. But we don't just say, oh, we've only got 10% of the definition of a project and here's the estimate for that. What we do is we have a design contingency that's part of the estimate. And as we proceed through these higher levels of design, we lower that and it gets smaller and smaller. And theoretically, if that worked perfectly, you would do a 10% design and have kind of probably a fairly small construction cost estimate because you haven't defined yet very many elements that are ultimately going to be costed out, but you would have a really big design contingency. And then as you went through the design process, that contingency would get smaller and smaller until they matched at the end. Now in practice, that never really works. And this is a bad example here. But what I would add to what Diego said about the 90% design estimate is that still included some design contingency that's meant to cover more details that may get added as we get to the 100% design. So we're hopeful that in the end, that estimate's not really going to change or at least be close.
Thank you so much. That's it for me.
So these total annual cost allocation by agency, I assume that also includes kind of these administrative costs and staffing costs as well. That's going to be ongoing.
Yeah, I can. Yep. Yes, except labor. We blended the labor for this new facility into the main water quality control plan budget because we expect only one position that will be divided into part-time chemist, part-time maintenance, part-time operator, part-time engineer, part-time everything. So
okay,
yeah.
And following up on one of the chair's points, so as the years progress, you mentioned Mount View is going to get more of this water. Palo Alto gets a proportion less. Yeah. With this agreement, is there any way in which Palo Alto can maintain some of that water share if we end up needing it down the road?
So the costs are based on usage. So Palo Alto actually has a right to a certain amount of water now. It's just when we looked at the cost estimates moving forward for operations and maintenance, we didn't have that go up because we were not at this point in time, not assuming expansion, but we still do have water available for Palo Alto.
Right. And then are there any, I mean, I'm trying to understand any reasons why we should not approve this. I mean, are there any type of potential liabilities for the city entering this agreement? It just kind of seems like a win-win for everybody, but that always makes me a little suspicious.
Well, we've done a lot of analysis on this. It's not something that we've come to council before. All of the Northwest County Recycle Water Strategic Plans non-potable options assumed we would be building a small salt removal facility, since that was a mitigation measure for the environmental impact report to expand within Palo Alto. Currently, Mountain View has around 60 customers that are waiting to actually turn over to this higher quality water. So not new development, but current customer base. We have the grant, which is, we don't really want to walk away from getting federal funding. Also the SRF loan, we've been on their queue for a long time, and we're hearing down the pipeline, they're going to actually take a halt and not take on new projects for a little bit of time. So we don't want to miss the opportunity with SRF. We actually need to sign that agreement before the end of the year. Otherwise we lose the opportunity potentially to get that money. So the timing right now is about correct for us.
And can I just add, I mean, what Karen was adding, I think are a lot of the reasons why we want to proceed right now. As I understood your question, Vice Mayor, it's like, what's the downside, or is there a downside? And I think to answer that, our slide showed a lot of the benefits of this. The potential downside is that if Palo Alto never does expand its use of recycled water, and if we're not going to use a lot more of this water at Greer Park and the golf course, then we could be working on this investment that mainly benefits Mountain View. You know, I hope that we're going to make those investments and increase recycled water use in Palo Alto. The relationship with Mountain View as a partner is also very important to us from that angle as well. But if you wanted to know, like, what's the potential biggest downside, I'd say it's, oh, we build this and we only get those other kind of side benefits that are listed without ever starting to use more of the water ourselves.
And if I can add that out of this phase one, we have 13 million in the Bureau of Reclamation grant and 16 million from Valley Water. We don't necessarily have the options for those in phase two. That originally that 16 million from Valley Water was expected that it was going to cover 80% of the cost of the system. And then as it rose, we fortunately got this federal grant. But that only brought us up to around half of the total cost. Mountain View is getting use of the bulk of the water, and that was their justification for covering the balance of the capital costs. So that what Brad was talking about, if we don't expand our use, we've wasted the non-local dollars for the capital for a phase that we wouldn't be getting much benefit from. Sorry.
No, that's helpful additional context. I appreciate all that. I'd be surprised if the city were not to make those advancements in the future. This seems consistent with a lot of kind of continuing a lot of our priorities and goals. I appreciate staff's work on acquiring those grants. I'm sure that was a lot of work in addition to these designs, and to Vice Mayor Showalter for being here tonight and the support of Mountain View. So it's a great partnership. Really appreciate Mountain View taking on that significant capital investment, and don't see why we wouldn't support this.
Thank you. And let me just dive a little bit more into some things in the report on how we will or won't use our share of this phase one. So the report says we basically at this time we use 0.4 million MGD, million gallons per day, so about 400,000 gallons per day. It says of enhanced recycled water. Now, we have a lot of different terms here. Is that what we're currently producing and using for the golf course in Greer, or is recycled water? So that, I'm sorry, and that was in the Woodward and Kern report, not the staff report. That's on packet page 338. So we currently, for the golf course in Greer Park, we use about 400,000 gallons of recycled water, and that's the higher TDS water. Our golf course, when we redesigned it, my memory is that we redesigned it for vegetation that could tolerate that salinity level, and certain plants can and certain can't. At Greer Park, we blend our recycled water with potable water, Hetch Hetchy water, to get the TDS down to the point where that vegetation isn't harmed by using that water. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so about how much, then when we get this lower salinity recycled water, what's it, until we do an expansion of our uses for enhanced recycled water, other than reducing having to blend for Greer, do we have any immediate uses for this water?
Not currently. We did do a lot of analysis. So you're correct. The golf course was redesigned to take basically a salt tolerant grass that they put out there in the fairways. We did check with the golf course staff that were just here in the previous to see if they could use it for other irrigation on the golf course, but the greens need the Hetch Hetchy water, not our enhanced recycled waters, because there's still too many salts in there. And then Greer, we would reduce down what we blend. So that would be the only potable offset that we could see.
Well, I didn't appreciate that the greens are using Hetch Hetchy. So they've got a different piping for the greens.
The greens use Hetch Hetchy. So we did a bunch of analysis looking at the golf course. So, I mean, that there is other plants that are in the golf course that also are not on the existing purple pipe. So
okay, so we could switch those over to the enhanced. We could
probably
that piping's there.
We'd have to it'd be a capital project to do, but not the greens, but the other landscaping. I think we
and
could.
Why not the greens?
Because the greens can't the greens that the specific species of grass that they chose cannot handle any salt.
Oh, even the 450?
Even the 450.
Which is pretty common for a lot of potable water places.
That is what we checked with the golf course staff, and right now they're saying the greens cannot tolerate that.
We could follow up further on that, but that's the initial.
Maybe
Can I add
plant new
one other?
grass. Maybe we need some more.
And maybe
resistant
it's not
grass.
an answer to your question of whether there's something we could immediately do, but something that may be on our horizon eventually is currently this water is not paid for by Greer Park or the golf course, and there's no recycled water rate in Palo Alto. So that's part of the reason that we have not established other connections from businesses or others along East Bay Shore and or Embarcadero who may be able to connect and actually use this water. So another thing we may consider as we're heading into these next few years of while this project is going on is, do we want to establish a rate and work with other businesses to try to make more of those connections? Now, I don't know how the magnitude of use that we would achieve there, but it could be some additional.
And the Greer is off of we have a purple pipe, meaning that for recycled water pipe. And that runs, we're tapping into, where does that run and how do we tap into it for Greer?
It runs down East Bay Shore, and then it's hanging on the Matadero Creek underneath.
Oh, I was trying to figure out how it got back across to the west side. Okay.
Yeah.
So we got a pipe hanging over there. And I will add that East Palo Alto also takes a bit of our recycled water, I thought, very small, but okay. Well, is that just for their new playing fields across the creek?
So we looked at trying to expand recycled water into East Palo Alto to their playing fields. And at that point in time, we couldn't find the capital to expand the pipeline. So there's a little bit of recycled water use, and I think it's not technically, I think East Palo Alto is where there's a horizontal levee built along the creek on San Francisco that was using some recycled water.
Okay. All right, thanks. I was really glad that Julie brought up the potential for the dual plumbing in new housing in the lower San Antonio area. And just for historic context, as you were kind of asking, well, why don't we have this? So it actually goes back to the problem we have is that our biggest candidate use, kind of similar to what Mount View has in the North Bayshore area, is the Stanford Research Park. It's further away and it's uphill. And it was built, it doesn't have dual plumbing because it was largely built out before North Bayshore and Mount View was built out. I mean, there was low density and industrial use there, but the whole Googleplex, all that development is over the last couple of decades. And we in our area, most adjacent to our generating this, we made community decisions 30, 40 years ago that we would not do additional big commercial development adjacent to our baylands. And so we don't have that opportunity for tapping into new development there. There's also the interesting thing that's noted in the staff report about the research park, that the demand for that water will go down because the state has fortunately is going forward with a sunsetting of ornamental turf. And so all these places in the research park that have driven me crazy, seeing lawns being watered with Hetch Hetchy water, massive amounts that nobody plays on, that's going to go away in coming years. And that will diminish the water demand in the research park. If you may or may not know that we, a number of years ago, put in a landscaping ordinance for the research park that required indigenous vegetation upon major redevelopment in there. So we already have that covered, so that over time, as they re-landscape, they're going to go not only essentially xeriscape vegetation, but indigenous xeriscape vegetation, or low water use anyway. So that creates that dilemma. And but I'm still very hopeful that we will see the cost benefits of a big investment of Purple Pipe up into the research park, and that once we can offer them the water that they need for their vegetation, we'll get a partner there on that. Let's see, I think that's about it for me. Yeah, so do we have any other questions or comments? All right, then staff is looking for a recommendation that the Finance Committee recommend to the council approval of the financing plan, and directing staff to issue bids to secure financing on the project. And we have a motion to.
I'll move the staff motion.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Chair Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lifcott Hayes.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. And thanks, Vice Mayor, for joining us. All right, so that takes us to our third and final item tonight. which is the acceptance of the California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS pension annual valuation reports as of June 30th, 2022.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We actually have Budget Manager Jessie Deschamps on the line, who will be presenting. And Paul Harper is also here in the room, so to speak, to help us facilitate this conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to Jessie to kick us off as part of this annual report.
Sure, thank you. Also just want to mention that we have our actuary from CalPERS, David Clement, joining us online as well. Next slide, please. So tonight's meeting transmits the CalPERS reports that are used to inform the fiscal year 25 budget and the financial planning of pension benefits. So in this presentation, we will review funding sources and terminology, the status of pension plans, both current and expected, and next steps in the budget process. The overall goal this evening is to accept the CalPERS reports. Next slide. This slide reviews funding sources to pay pensions and the terminology used in annual billing. First, employee contributions. Employee contributions reflect 12% or 12 cents for every dollar that CalPERS pays in pensions. Employees pay a percentage of their paycheck based on their pension plan in Tier 1, 2, or PEPRA. As of September 2023, nearly 55% of staff are PEPRA. Additionally, employees pick up a portion of the employer's normal cost as negotiated in city's labor agreements. This is 1 to 2% in miscellaneous plans and 3 to 4% in safety plans. Next are employer contributions. Oh, sorry, prior slide.
Excuse me, Jessie, would you mind speaking a little closer to your mic, please?
Yeah, sure.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Thanks.
Let me try turning up my volume as well. Is that a little better? Okay, we'll keep going. So next are employer contributions. Employer contributions reflect 32% or 32 cents for every dollar that CalPERS pays in pensions. This percent does not contemplate the pension trust fund. The payments made by the city to CalPERS include two components: the normal cost and UAL, or unfunded accrued liability. Normal cost, also referred to as pay-go, reflects the cost for current active employees and is billed as a percentage of payroll. UAL, or catch-up payments, are billed as a flat dollar amount over a 20-year amortization period. This liability will change when actual results differ from assumptions. Next are CalPERS investment earnings. Investment earnings generate most of the resources to fund pensions at 56% or 56 cents for every dollar. Therefore, plans are impacted when actual returns do not meet targets. In the most recent period, CalPERS experienced a 6.1% loss as compared to a 6.8% target. Historically, those investment returns have ranged from negative 23.6% to positive 21.3% in a given year, and the 20-year average is 6.9%. Lastly is the pension trust. The pension trust fund is separate and apart from CalPERS, and the balance is not contemplated in the CalPERS valuation. The trust was established in 2017 to proactively save above and beyond CalPERS determined levels. The balance in the trust as of June 30th, 2023 is $58.4 million. The city's retiree benefit policy outlines the uses of these funds to ultimately pay pension costs. One of those methods is to pay ADPs, or additional discretionary payments, to CalPERS for amounts exceeding the 1-year required payment. So essentially leaving a balance in the trust equivalent to a 1-year payment and transmitting any excess funds to CalPERS. Staff expects to reach sufficient balances in the trust to begin ADPs in the next year or two. Next slide, please. As of the June 30th, 2022 valuation, there are no significant changes to the CalPERS actuarial assumptions or policies. Overall, the total employer contribution is expected to be just under $65 million in fiscal year 25. This is a 5.4 million or 9.1% increase from the prior year and includes approximately 16 million for normal cost and 49 million for UAL. In the current period, CalPERS generated an investment loss of 6.1% as compared to a 6.8% target. The impact from investment returns are phased in over 5 years, also referred to as a ramp-up period, and 20-year amortization. This loss was preceded by a 21.3% gain in the prior year. So together, these two returns nearly offset the change in funded balance. As shown in the table, the city's funded status increased and decreased nearly 10% over the prior 2 years. This was primarily due to those investment gains and losses. Next slide. This graph shows the blended normal cost and UAL, or total cost, expressed as a percentage of payroll. In fiscal year 25, the safety group rates are 83.1% and miscellaneous rates are 47.4%. The fluctuations in the out years are primarily due to the investment gains and losses in fiscal year 24 and 25. These are subject to the 5-year ramp up with full impact realized in fiscal year 28 and 29, respectively. So beginning in fiscal year 30, you see a tapering of rates in both groups. In the table, we have also restated the out years for potential impact due to the preliminary 5.8% return in June 2023. The actual results will be included in the annual reports issued next year and the fiscal year 26 budget. Next slide. This chart shows the UAL and funded status. The total UAL for both plans has increased from the prior year from 392 million to 553 million. As mentioned previously, the fluctuation in the prior 2 years is primarily due to the investment gains and losses. The combined funded status of both plans is 63.8%. However, if adjusted for balances in the pension trust, this funded level increases to 67.6%. Lastly, the city completed a comprehensive review of pension plans with outside actuary Foster & Foster in fiscal year 23. This analysis projects that the city will reach a 90% funded status by fiscal year 36 or 37. Policy goals target a 15-year time frame, which is by fiscal year 36. This relies on the continued practice to budget normal cost at a 5.3% discount rate. However, the city's practice to contribute one-time savings will help achieve goals sooner. Next slide. There are several activities in the near term that will impact future pension costs. This includes the preliminary 5.8% investment return for the period ending June 2023. This return is lower than the CalPERS target return of 6.8%, however, is higher than the rate of 5.3% assumed by the city. Additionally, the City Council approved new labor agreements with all groups through fiscal year 26. This includes adjustments for COLAs, market alignments, and other terms of employment. And lastly, the fiscal year 24 adopted budget includes staffing additions, increasing full-time staff from 1,018 to 1,063, which is an increase of 45 FTE or 4.4%. Next slide. So looking forward, staff will return in December and January to review the long-range financial forecast. As part of this review, staff will include pension trust contributions at the lower 5.3% rate and estimates for expected changes, such as the preliminary 5.8% return. This long-range financial forecast and input from the Finance Committee and City Council will be used to develop the fiscal year 25 proposed budget. Deliberations with the Finance Committee to review the proposed budget will occur in May for City Council adoption in June. And just to wrap up the presentation, the action this evening is to accept the June 30th, 2022 CalPERS valuation reports. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this item?
Chair, we have no request to speak.
Thank you. So colleagues, questions and comments? Julie?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Duchamps, for your presentation. I appreciate it. My question is about the ADPs. I know that the Section 115 was created in 2017, and I'm just wondering back in 2017 when it was deemed necessary for the city to take these matters into its own hands. When did we predict that we were going to be able to start making these additional discretionary payments? And are we on target with that? Are we behind? Or are we ahead?
I suspect Jesse's going to look to me on this one, since this predates her. We hadn't necessarily contemplated it, frankly, when we established this in 2017. It wasn't until staff took the work with the Finance Committee to establish the pension funding policy, now I think we call it the long-term benefits funding policy, that we contemplated a multi-variable plan for us to manage pension liability. So honestly, I think in 2017, we didn't have a date. I do think in general, now that we have the funding plan, that we've updated it last year and we'll do it again in 3 years, in alignment with CalPERS, that we are following our plan and in theory on track to continue our funding strategy to reach in, I can't remember the number of years, Jesse can inform me of that. So we are on track with that. I will always caution that with what you just saw in the volatility, that any given year, you're going to see and potentially see major swings in the investment returns. And that's going to create significant changes in our funding level. And that's when I hear CalPERS' CEO in my head saying, we're a long-term investor. We're not just a 1 year, 12-month investment. So we are going to see these fluctuations. So 1 year, it may look like we're on track to meet our goal, and another year, it may look like we're way far away from it. So I say that with a grain of that understanding that right now we are on track, but very simple things can throw us off base in any given snapshot.
And just as a matter of curiosity, how many California municipalities have gone the route we've gone with this 115 trust?
That's a great question. I actually don't know. I wonder if Dave has a sense of it. David, do you have a sense?
Sorry, I don't know the number of that.
Yeah, I don't either. I will say it's increased significantly. We started as a very small cohort of California cities that started this in 2017, and the interest has grown exponentially over the years. And different cities have chosen to take different stances. So not all cities have done 115s. Some have chosen to only do ADPs. And our council, when we're looking at our policies, we're thinking about risk, thinking about control, frankly. And chose this kind of multi-variable process for us to tackle.
Thanks much. That's it for me.
I'll just add that we actually made the policy decision to set up the 115 in 2016, but staff at that time wasn't ready to tell us what dollar amounts we needed to start contributing. So that's when we moved forward in 2017. Greer?
Just one question. Actually, thought the presentation cleared up a few things for me, so I appreciated that. Kylie, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this because I know this analysis is going to come later, but can you just give maybe a sense, kind of big picture, what this means for fiscal year 25 budget, long range forecast? I mean, do you just have any sense of that right now?
Actually, I think Jesse has a good sense of that. So Jesse, can you provide them just a high level? What I think the council member is asking is, how does this compare with our forecast that we've done previously in terms of the assumptions for the cost of retirement? And, are we going to expect to see major fluctuations in the long range this coming December as a result of these reports?
Okay, so let me know if this answers it. So in the long range last year, what we did is we knew that we had the preliminary 6.1% loss that is materializing tonight. But in the long range last year, we did program estimated costs for that loss. So no, I don't anticipate too much fluctuation because we did take that into consideration in our prior year long range. Does that kind of help answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
No, that's perfect. One other just kind of let's pull all these pieces together for the committee to be aware of is as part of your funding policy, you've decided to assume a more conservative rate of return. So as we've done that, when staff is creating these calculations for budget, we are assuming it based on that lower rate of return. So you are, some of the change that you'll see is actually a change in what our required contribution is to CalPERS versus what's going to the 115 trust. As there's some difference between those. As we're moving between the reality of we're contributing at a 5.8% rate versus CalPERS is achieving a 6.8. So that's some variability you're going to see, but overall, like Jesse said, we've planned for these things since we do have this information in advance. There will be some fluctuations since it's based on payroll for some of our costs, but we've done our best to include it.
Yeah, so as Kylie was pointing out, we are using a more conservative rate of return than CalPERS is projecting. One question I had, I was trying to recall from last year, and for that matter, the previous year, it's be something I'd like to be able to see going forward in these reports is we have, for instance, on table 2, we have our current and projected employer contributions. And I don't have the prior year's similar table in front of me. But have these numbers changed from what we were seeing as a projection last year for the next 8 years?
Jesse?
Yeah, so typically we include a chart in the presentation that uses the current valuation and the 2-year prior, showing the same projections for each year to see how it changes based on the issuance of the valuation. We didn't do that in this round because of the significant gain and loss. It just made those lines look very far apart. This kind of more extreme volatility the past couple of years just made it look a little bit, I don't know, very different. But typically we do include something like that in the presentation.
So, our long range forecast used, well, for instance, for this year, it'll use presumably what's in table 2 as projections. What I'm trying to understand is last year's long range forecast, did it have significantly different projections going throughout? I don't know if it went out to 2029 at that time or what it was. I'm assuming that it in this case it's 6 forward years, right? Although one of those years, I guess, is now known because the FY25 is actually based on real numbers from CalPERS. So has our long range forecast changed as a result of changes to table 2?
Not significantly, because in our long range last year, we did plug estimates for the 6.1% loss.
Okay. Okay. I think that answers my questions then. And we don't have any other questions. Staff is seeking a recommendation from the committee to the council to accept the June 30th, 2022 CalPERS annual valuation reports.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Lifcott Haynes,
Yes.
Chair Burt,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stone,
Yes.
the motion carries.
Thank you. And our last item is just to go over future meeting agendas, whatever we have
Yes.
Tentatively,
So tentatively, we actually only have one item for our next meeting, which is October 3rd. So I do wonder if the committee wishes for us to defer that item, so we would have a multiple item agenda as it is not time sensitive. And then we could resume our meetings likely October 17th and November 7th, where we would have more significant robust agendas.
okay, and I had one other item that I was interested in getting an update on is, and it's not an action item, but the fiber to the premise program and where we stand on that. And just related matters.
Sure. I can coordinate with our utilities director, but I do know that they just did an update at UAC, so I
Right.
suspect it would be feasible to bring that same update to this committee. It wouldn't necessarily be an action item, but we could request them to provide some sort of update study session information.
Right, and I was assuming there would be no action.
Okay. I can coordinate with him on that and see what timing would work for them. I suspect, given that, then I would actually highly recommend you cancel your October 3rd meeting, because our ability to pull a report like that together this week might be a little constrained.
And it's not a rush.
Great. So then I think what we'll do is we'll look towards the 17th of October and November 7th for something like that. We'll also then bring forward the print and mail service evaluation that we have agendized. And we are looking at another item about the electric integrated resource plan for 2023. So those are probably the three items that will swirl around those 2 days.
And my calendar is populated with a meeting of this committee on December 19th, which is following the last council meeting of the calendar year. Are we anticipating that we'd actually have a meeting on that date?
No.
Okay.
The next dates after November 7th would be November 28th, since the other one is falling during the kind of Thanksgiving and Veterans Day holiday. And that was one of the tentative dates on the council's schedule. And that's when we would have our audit come forward. And then the final meeting of the calendar year would be December 5th. If any of those dates don't work for the committee, it's at your discretion on canceling, asking us to pull for new dates or the like.
Okay.
So October 3rd, we're not meeting.
As long as the committee is okay with that, then.
My mom would be very happy because it's her birthday. And I would have.
Well, then for council members.
To
Stop
score
playing.
points, you
Yes.
should tell her we canceled it for her birthday.
So I'm trying to advocate for it so I can go back and say happy birthday. This is the gift.
All right. And on that note, meeting's adjourned.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
So we're